Hi, everyone. Welcome wherever you're joining us from. My name is Louis Vargas, and I am the founder of NFCP, the Network for Financial Crime Prevention. And we are gratefully joined by Dimitris today. He is going to provide a presentation to us regarding important, is near and dear to my heart. It's around maritime sanctions, trade shifts, and things to keep in mind. But really quickly, before I hand it over to Dimitris, I just wanted to give everybody kind of a heads up on NFCP. If you don't know who we are, please check us out on our website, which is nfcp.info, or we're also on LinkedIn, where we post a lot of thought leadership content and all that good stuff. I know financial crime prevention is in our name, but we also cover general risk and compliance issues as well. We are offer a free membership, and we're working hard to continue to support the community, and that's what's really key to us. It's supporting the community that we could benchmark and learn together, and help uplift each other and the programs that we're a part of. So as we lead into this great presentation that Dimitris has prepared for us, I guess it dates me a bit, but I started in the compliance space in 2013, and I think it was like late 2014 or so is when OFAC began sanctioning vessels. And I became quite passionate about that because it was new and I wanted to really understand it, ensure that we had the appropriate controls in place. And I remember having conversations with my managers about, it's not only sufficient to screen the vessel name because that changes all the time. The IMO number is key because that's the kind of the social security number. The vessel is born with that number. And that took a lot of conversations to get people to understand that. And then, it evolved into, okay, trying to understand and use tools to understand where these vessels are going. Would they provide, or would they kind of, provide a nexus to a sanctions country or something that's out of the institution's risk appetite? And it just started evolving into this kind of crazy thing where today we see that it's more complicated. Sanctions is merging a lot with trade compliance and export controls more than ever before. And I don't think it would decouple at any time. I think this is where it's going. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of share that at first that, I'm happy that you could share this with our community, but I've also been very passionate about it for a long time. And I hope that people could really appreciate and understand what you're sharing today because it's super important. We need to get it right because there is a lot of people that don't understand this and how to get it right.
Yeah, and what I wanted to mention as well is that when we're talking about these vessels disappearing from the maps because they're trying to do something illicit, it is not something that it triggers our interest just because we are working with the finance preventions and with the crimes and all the rest, but it affects our own personal life as well, because whenever we are on the board, whenever we are having our families on the passenger vessel, on a cruise ship, or whenever, if we do have vessels in this close area, switching off the race, spoofing, having DNS jamming because of the third parties in the closest region, this is a risky because it can affect ourselves as well. So it is not something that we are seeing on the screens only, but it is something that we can see out there as well.
Exactly. Without further ado, Dimitris, please provide a quick kind of introduction of yourself, and then
Of course.
you could go into your presentation. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me here. So in the meantime, I will try to share my screen, and please tell me know if you're able to see my screen. And
yes, perfect.
Perfect. That's amazing. So, hello everyone. I'm Dimitris Ampatzidis. I'm the Senior Risk and Compliance Analyst at Kpler. And for those that do not know Kpler, we are an organization. We are providing transparency to the commodities and cargo flows. We're tracking over 40 commodities by now. We're talking about LNG, LPG, crude oil, and dry cargo as well. And quite recently, 2 years ago, we completed the acquisition of Marine Traffic. So we merge all this information about IS data and the cargo into an attempt to provide more light about what these vessels are doing when they are switching off the race, when they're disappearing from the maps, in order to connect all the dots and to unseat the real truth, what's taken place out there. Without any delay, let's proceed with the presentation. Louis, in the meantime, if you do have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. So let's start by discussing about the escalation of these sanctions in order to understand about what's going on out there. As Louis stated at the beginning, back in 2014, we had the first sanctions from OFAC, from the US government. Those first sanctions were heavily targeted on the Iranian cargo transfers, were heavily focusing on vessels having the Iranian flag. However, after this period, we have seen a huge increase on sanctions, both on vessels and on the maritime organization, on the ship owners. So, if we just examine the last 5 years, so if we are screening the period before the Russian-Ukrainian escalation war and the period, of course, after, we can see a huge impact. So, back in May 2020, we had approximately 400 vessels been sanctioned. The vast majority of those we are talking about Iranian vessels and North Korean vessels, and of course in here we can see the spike that we had after the Russian-Ukrainian war, with a lot of vessels being included in these sanctions. We're talking about Russian vessels, vessels having the Russian flag in most of the times. However, quite recently, the last 12 months, we have seen all the regulators. So we are talking about the US government from OFAC, the FSI or FSDO from the UK government, and of course the European Union, focusing on the vessels, focusing on the cargo transfers. So they're trying to disrupt that flows. They don't care if the vessel having a non-Russian or Iranian flag, if, for example, the vessel is having the Barbados flag or the Panama or whatever, or if the owner is not based in such a sanctioned country. So we do have many sanctions in companies based in Dubai, based in United Arab Emirates or in Turkey, and this is quite a change as well. So that's why the last 12 months, the last 1 year, we have seen a huge incline, as we can see over here, on the sanctions. Just for your mention, back on January, we had more than 180 vessels being sanctioned by OFAC. It was one of the heaviest packages that we have seen on the maritime history so far. Last month, on May, we had a huge activity by all the regulators, by FSD, EU Commission, with the latest package for sanctions focusing on Russia, and of course from the OFAC focusing on the Iranian flows. And that's why we can see that recent spike over here. We had more than 170 vessels, new vessels, being sanctioned during last month. And that's why we can see that approximately we had doubled sanctioned vessels within just 1 year. And as we see more and more vessels being sanctioned and more companies being included on the sanctions, we are talking about an expanding sanctioned fleet, an expanding fleet that they are trying to continue their operations undisrupted, to continue the flows. And in order to do something like that, they have to find some ways to do it. And we will see later how they are trying to continue their operations. So, to have some just key takeaways for last month, I want to mention that whenever we are talking about disrupting the flows, it is extremely important, as Louis probably already know, to follow the money, to understand where the money goes, where the money ended, because that's what the regulators are trying to regulate. So, the vessels that have been sanctioned last May, just a few days ago, can be connected with more than $55 billion worth of transfers the last 17 months. So we're talking from the beginning of 2024. And we can see that mostly we're talking about vessels being connected with flows coming from Russia or Iran. Approximately it was around 55% of the total flows, and all these commodities were ended up in India, China, or Turkey. So this is the vast majority of the flows that was disrupted quite recently. Of course, we haven't had only sanctions on oil cargoes, we have sanctions on LNG carriers as well, especially coming from the EU Commission. After March, we do have new regulations on the Russian LNG, which is important on the European ports, and this is one of the first actions that the European Commission was taken in order to regulate those involvement with the Russian LNG. And of course, OFAC just a few days ago was just republished the guidance about the reflagging practices, and especially when we're talking about the flag of convenience, there's expressing some concerns about how the IMO and the flag authorities are regulating their own fleet. And I think that this is quite crucial, because whenever we are screening a vessel, we have to have on our mind that if a vessel has been changing their flags again and again, of course something taken place over there. Again, whenever we are performing a due diligence, whenever we're doing a risk assessment on a case of us, it is extremely important to see all the small details, not only focusing if the vessel is sanctioned or the owners, the 6 layers of owners are included on the sanctions, but at the same time to see the classification societies, to see the flag authorities, to see all the operational stuff that they are being connected with. So, as I said before, all these operators, they are trying to do one thing. They are trying either to continue their operation if they are sanctioned without having any issue, or if we are talking about not sanctioned vessels, not sanctioned owners, their key interest is to continue their operation, to continue to be in contact with sanctioned cargo without never being detected. So, in order to do something like that, they are connected with plenty of potential illicit activities. The most easy one is to just switch off the race in order to be hidden from the monitors, in order to be hidden from to hide their activity, and try to have a port call or to perform my ship-to-ship transfers in the open oceans in order to receive that sanctioned cargo and then transfer it all around. However, this is a quite risky activity. So whenever we're talking about a vessel switching off the race, we are talking about a vessel which is not be visible from the other vessels in the closest region. And whenever we're talking about the busiest lines, the busiest trade lines in the world, like Singapore, this is really risky. And we have seen accidents, we have seen incidents in these areas because of that specific thing. Last year, we did had a huge collision in around Singapore late in the night. The whole Coast Guard had a huge operation in order to save both of the crews. So it is important to know where the vessel is at any point of time. And more or less, this is why the ICE technology was developed and was integrated within the shipping industry in order to assist us and to enhance the safety and security on the vessels. So, as we can see over here, based on an analysis that we did, the last 2.5 years, we have seen a lot of dark ship-to-ship transfers taking place, especially around EOPL, the Eastern Outer Port of Limits in Singapore. This is a quite hot spot for these activities. And whenever we're talking about dark ship-to-ship transfers, we're talking about ship-to-ship transfers that taken place with the eyes off, involved sanctioned cargo, more or less. Whenever we're talking about the Singapore region, we're talking about Iranian cargoes. And the only way to verify these events is by utilizing satellite imagery in order to spot and to verify both of the vessels. So one of the most typical examples is this case, which involved the Amor and the Aurora relay. So at first we had Amor, which made a dark port call at Cork Island and Lavan in Iran. So she just entered the Persian Gulf, so switched off her eyes, and having these 2 port calls in order to load cargo, to load Iranian crude from there, and then it traveled all over around from Iran to Singapore. They closed their eyes, and there she was waiting the Aurora relay, which she was traveling around around India, and she came up over here. She performed a dark ship-to-ship transfer at the end of September, at the end of last September, and that cargo was ended up in 2 refineries in China. So this is the most typical operation that we are seeing in the area. And the only way to be protected against something like that is by having information about both of the cargoes, so to understand what the vessels are carrying at this point of time, and at the end to have the satellite imagery in order to verify what's going on and why we do have a change on draft, why we do have these loitering events that potentially can be spotted on the ice data and all the rest. So, as you can see, the vast majority, around 1 out of 3 dark events since 2022 taken place around Singapore. And this makes totally sense. In general, Singapore, it is a huge hub, a huge maritime hub, and it is close to both India and China, which are talking about the two main receivers of both Russian and Iranian crude. The easy part is to perform a dark ship-to-ship transfer. The most complicated one is to do spoofing, is to manipulate your RAs, so to not trigger alerts on the enforcement regulators about that you have switching off your eyes, that you are disappearing from the maps, but you are pretending that either you're doing a loitering event, or you're performing an anchorage, or the most advanced one, the most recent one, that you are having a real trajectory. So you're mimic past trajectories of your own fleet, and the only way to spot something like this is to have access to raw data from the terrestrial stations. Because in some cases, for example, over here, we can see that this vessel was transporting signal around Brazil, but we have received that information from our stations in Venezuela. So, because we do know our capabilities, we do know the capabilities of our stations, this is impossible. So, and after that, we did have another verification from another station in Brazil around the open Atlantic Ocean. So we were sure that this vessel was not traveling from Brazil to South Africa over here, but she was traveling actually from Venezuela to South Africa. So in the meantime, when the vessel was approaching the middle of Atlantic Ocean, she was trying to manipulate the race in order to hide what really they're doing about. I worked on a specific example in order to see how this is going on within the Middle East Gulf. So, in here we can see vessels that are approaching the Persian Gulf. We are receiving that signal, and as we can see, the vessel is pretending that is not entering the Persian Gulf, but she's pretending that after the United Arab Emirates, she's traveling from there to Pakistan. And as we can see, we are receiving that signals from terrestrial stations that are located closer to Iran. So it does not make any sense to receive that kind of signals within that specific region. And as we continue, we can see that the vessel was just disappearing. They do have a nice gap over there. And then she was returning back to the Mid-East Gulf. But again, we're receiving that information from stations that are located to Iran, close to the closer region. So it does not make any sense to receive that signals out of the Persian Gulf. So the only way to verify all these events is to own this data and to be able to analyze on the spot and ad hoc. In order to have the whole story in just one page, we can see that at the beginning of this January, we had a high risk ice gap at the beginning of the Mid-East Gulf, and then we had a high risk port call in Badr within mid-May, and then we had the ice manipulation in order to hide the further activity of the Iranian crude. And as you can see, this is a vessel which has been we have blurred her name because we're talking about a non-sanctioned vessel even now. So that's why it is extremely important to screen all the vessels against plenty of parameters. It is not enough to stay if the vessel is included on the sanctions list or if the owners are included on the sanctions list, but the most critical one is to identify all these parameters that can be triggering the next sanction. So if that vessel that we do have in front of your eyes, if it could be potentially being sanctioned quite soon. And as we have spoken about dark activities, it is extremely important for us to have a clear understanding about the increases that we have seen in such operations. So we made an analysis for last year, and we can see that we had a huge incline in all these activities, both about dark ship-to-ship transfers and spoofing events, from approximately 20 cumulative to 20 events that we had. Within 2022, we had a huge spike back in May in 2024 with more than 200 events taking place that month. And this increase was quite huge, and was taking place in parallel with the enforcement rounds from OFAC and from EU, especially on the Russian LNG. So our assumptions, our estimation is that the vessels, especially the Russian interstate vessels, were trying to find ways to move away from these sanctions when they will be enforced this March, when we're talking about the Russian LNG. So that's why we had a huge spike back then. But after that spike, all these dark events was remain quite high, as we can see, especially for the dark ship-to-ship transfers and for the spoofings that were stabilized around more than 20 events per month. And this is quite critical because when we're talking about these vessels, we're talking about a specific number of vessels. We're not talking about millions, we're talking about some thousand vessels out there. And by having 20, 30 dark events per month, we're talking about having this number of vessels disappearing from the maps and have no knowledge what they're doing in the meantime, and their vessels around them are unable to detect them. So we are much more prone to have collisions in these closer areas. And of course, when we're talking about dark activity, it is quite crucial to connect it somehow with the sanctions. So, and this is a question that we received quite a lot. So we have detected a dark activity. When shall we expect that vessel to be included on the sanctions? So based on our analysis, and usually 1 out of 3 vessels is being sanctioned within the first 250 days after the initial dark event, either the dark port call, the dark ship transfer, or the spoofing. Of course, as we are progressing, we are seeing all the authorities being more fast on their approach. So that number, that 250 days, is coming lower and lower, and we are expecting to have more than 250 vessels being included on the sanctions list because of that activities within 2025. When I made that analysis back in February, at this point of time, we had our estimations was around for 400 vessels being included on the sanctions within this year, but we have seen already so many vessels being included on the sanctions, and plenty of those were already highlighted by our side. So it is not impossible to make a quite good call, a quite good estimation about where these vessels will be sanctioned. The only thing that you have to do, because whenever we're talking about sanctions, we're talking about political activity coming from the regulators, is to see the patterns, of what happened previously from these regulators where they're focusing and what things they're trying to disrupt. So by combining these two, and by having information about the cargo and the dark operations that this vessel was engaged with, it is quite easy for us to understand what we will be having in front of our eyes quite soon. And as we are coming to the end, I want to have some key takeaways in order to have on our mind, so that sanction enforcement, as we are seeing, is tightening. I think that within 2022 and 2023, at the beginning of 2024, we had the years of regulations. the authorities were placing restrictions. They were placing specific restrictions on the energy flows, on the cargo flows, and all on these companies on how they shall be operating. They were quite reluctant with some operations, and the last 9-10 months we have seen all the regulators being quite aggressive when happening to the sanctions. So after September, we have seen more than 600 vessels being sanctioned. These vessels were not having risk criteria other than the most usual ones. So we're talking about be connecting with sanctioned companies or sanctioned flags. All these vessels, the vast majority of them were connected with non-sanctioned flags, with quite typical P&I clubs or classification societies. And the only thing that you can spot that this vessel was doing something suspicious was the dark activity. So that's why it is quite crucial to have that operational analysis within the risk assessment that you are performing. And of course, as we are progressing, I think that it is quite obvious that compliance isn't optional, and we cannot play the cards to the regulators. I didn't know. It is mandatory for us to perform to have a process, to have a framework internally in order to follow, in order to be away from these cases. So I think that it is quite crucial to have all this information in one place to get aligned and to try to understand not only what the vessels are doing, but even though why the vessels are performing something like that. So when you see a vessel loitering around the port, to be able to understand if this is something that shall be expected or not. And by having that, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Louis, if you do have any question, I will be more than keen to answer this. And of course, for all these people that will be seeing that presentation, I will be really glad to answer their questions.
This was really great, Dimitris. A lot of great points, a lot of great pearls of wisdom. So yeah, I really appreciate this. And you know, I like the point you made during the summary is that compliance is not optional, right?
Yeah.
So we need to have the appropriate controls in place. We need to address them, even if you feel that the risk is low. You still need to prove that you have certain controls in place. I've spoken to many heads of shipping, and they also have the interpretation that just because a lot of their clients are domiciled in a low risk country, that
Yeah.
means it's a low
No.
risk business. But the ship doesn't stay in that country, right? It
No.
moves around the
No.
world, and that's where the risk comes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as I stated before, we have seen so many companies being sanctioned in, let's
Mhm.
say, medium risk countries. So we are not too far away from seeing companies sanctioned in low risk countries. I think that this is the next step.
Yeah. So, yeah, I just want to reiterate that if anyone has questions for Demetrius, for us at NFCP, please reach out. Demetrius has kindly enough provided his email address on the presentation, as you can see. He is also quite active on LinkedIn, so you could reach out to him there. I'm sure that he will appreciate that as well. If you want to reach out to us and we can funnel questions to him, whatever works best. But he is very friendly, so don't feel shy to reach out to him. I guess since we're running out of time, I would love to have a follow-up chat with you. So let's
Yep.
see maybe some questions that come in from the public. We could have a chat to see how do we follow up on this based on maybe new events that are coming about. But yeah, let's take it from there. Let's see what questions roll in, and we could base our follow-up on either
Perfect.
those questions or questions that we deem can be delve into a bit deeper.
Sounds like a good plan, my friend.
Awesome. So again, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciated a lot of great information there. So I'm also super happy that we recorded the session because now
Yeah.
people could go back and rewind and kind of really absorb all the details that were provided because it's a lot. And
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
it right, you have to take your time and really see the different customers you have, the different risks you have, the different vessels that might be, you might be doing business with. So it's a lot of great points. So yes, please feel free to reach back, whomever is watching this, please feel free to watch as much as you can, rewind it, fast forward, because what Dimitris shared today is very key to stay out ahead of the risks that we face in the maritime space. So thanks again, Demetrius. We'll be in touch. And have a great day wherever you are, the
Italy.
rest of you, all the viewers, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks again.
Thanks. Stay safe. Bye.